Hello, everyone. I've just done my intro, as you've heard, and I'm talking to Pete Chramiec. Am I pronouncing that right?
It's pretty close. Chramiec,
Chramiec.
similar to Maniac,
Chramiec.
phonetically similar. Yeah. So when the
Okay.
Flashdance movie came out with the Maniac song,
I hear
that
you.
was uh, that was fun for me, being
Yeah.
mocked in sixth grade.
I I remember uh, there was the Lego, the Zach. He's a Lego maniac, and I
Yeah.
remember seeing that commercial and just thinking, oh fuck,
Hmm.
and then go to school the next day and I was just a
Here,
Lego maniac, and I was
here
like,
it comes.
I don't even fucking play with Lego anyway.
Yeah.
But I did just say Lego instead of Legos,
Legos. Yeah.
which is
That's
not
plural.
that's not the preferred nomenclature. Um,
Yep.
anyway, hi Pete, how you doing?
Hey, I'm
How's it
doing
going,
really
man?
good. I'm excited. I'm like nervous.
Well,
I'm like,
we're just gonna talk nerd guitar
I
shit.
know
That's fine.
that it'll fade.
And why you play and shit. And so we have the mutual friend of Joseph Plummer,
Hmm.
who does the Tour Stories podcast, and mutual friend, and he put us in touch. And like I was saying before we started recording, he knew I was into crossover thrash punk and hardcore in the late '80s,
Yep.
and he's like, "Did you like Verbal Assault?" I was like, "Of course I like fucking Verbal Assault. Who didn't?"
Nice.
So it's very nice to talk to you. So you guys have gotten back together. You played some shows last year. Is that what happened?
Yeah, we played 18 shows this year.
Wow,
Yeah,
wow,
I'm pretty. I can't believe it. Yeah, it went from not a chance in hell for 30 years to, oh fuck it, let's do a show,
right.
and then we just kept it going. We did a bunch of like 4-day stints all over the place.
That's great. You know
It-
what was the deciding factor? What was the decision to?
um, I'll try. All my stories are long, but I'll try to keep them short. Run up to the what election? 2020 election, or was it the
Yes.
2018? Yeah, run up to the 2020 election. Um, people are always asking us about it, and for 30 years, it was just like, no, that's just not going to happen. And then just everything was so politically fucking fraught and torturous, and I kept thinking like, you know, what could I do on any scale? And it kind of kept shrinking to the scale of like, well, fuck it. If I could just give my couple hundred friends in Rhode Island a great night that they've wanted
Right.
for 30 years, I should do it just for the psychic goodwill.
Right.
Um, and and then I was literally booked to go the day all the flights sort of stopped on the pandemic. So then we had kind of more time to talk about it and build up
Right.
to it. And then as soon as we could, I just went out and practiced a few times, and uh, it was really immediately fun. And
That's great.
so we did it.
If there's one good thing to have come out of that, um, the worst president of our time, it
Yeah,
was that good classic bands got back together like yourselves, and some
I,
good art got made as a result of telling him to go fuck himself.
yeah,
Um, if anyone listens to this podcast and wanted to know my political affiliation, there it is right there. I
yeah.
fucking hate that man. Anyway,
That
well,
fucking
that's
guy.
yeah, fucking guy, fucking. But you know, it was like when you guys were around in the first place, it was sort of a reaction to the Reagan years, was it not?
Exactly.
You know, it was, and so here comes this other president that sort of mirror. I mean, if anything, it's the Reagan years on steroids. It's even so much
Mhm.
worse if that could be imagined. And how fitting is it that a band of your ilk got back together to sort of bookend it in a sort of a weird way?
Yeah, lyrically, it's we couldn't be more relevant, you know.
Sure,
And
sure,
even with like Russia and Ukraine, like we have like Reagan sucks lyrics, uh, Cold War lyrics. It all just fits in, and lots of like just general be a good human lyrics, which
sure.
is good to go back over when you're in your 50s.
Well, that was what was great about punk and hardcore music, though. Let's face it. It was like so many. It was sort of just holding a mirror up to what was going on, and these were younger people that were sort of, voted out essentially, or not. Their opinions weren't respected, and they were saying the most culturally relevant and politically diverse and profound
Yep.
things, that were coming out of, basements and VFW halls and shit like that.
Yeah.
Um, and yourself very much included. Were you guys considered, as you were inside of it, were you considered sort of a crossover thing? Because when I listen, I do hear sort of like palm muting and the things that like sort of I don't know if they were friends of yours or whatever, but like the DRI sort of, because they had the album crossover, of course.
Hmm.
There was like metal guitar influences and things like Dag Nasty and things like that. Who I talked to Brian about that as well. Was
Yeah.
that something you guys were considered?
Um, when Trial came out, we got a lot of that because, um, I had a kind of more, I don't know what the word for it is, techie guitar sound kind of.
Sure.
I had like a stereo thing, which was kind of weird, and yeah, I was chugging more than a lot of people were chugging, and I like I'm not a metal guy. Like I was just like I got a Mesa Boogie, and then all of a
Sure.
sudden you just
That'll do
naturally
it.
you're
That'll
like,
do it.
yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
It makes me feel happy.
yeah.
Um, so we would yeah we would often get added into those articles, when they were written, but uh, like it wasn't like a thing we wanted. Like I didn't
Sure.
know we were crossover-y. I just um,
You were just doing what you did.
yeah, and the right when we recorded Trial, a couple things basically the guitar sound changed right before, and I fell upon that stereo concoction that I came up with that kind of became our sound. That
Yeah.
I mean, people to this day still bug me about like, how the fuck do you get that sound?
And
And
I was going to ask you about that too. Is there a chorus happening in there somewhere?
I brought it up from the basement for a little show and tell. And the
Ah,
story is pretty fucking good. It's
let me see.
Verbal Assault would be like we'd play with Dag Nasty every time they would
Of
come
course.
through, and you know Brian obviously had a huge influence and all that.
Yeah.
And so we would just try to glom onto every show anywhere near New England. We'd sneak on, but Brian at one point showed up and he had like his fucking beautiful Marshall, but then he had this thing.
Okay.
So it was just a rack mount Boss chorus,
Yeah.
but it has these little fucking like the little level lights,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
and
Yep.
and like
If everyone
I
can't
don't
see, it is a rack mount Boss chorus unit from the '80s that was
yeah.
sort of prevalent in a lot of rigs at that point.
Yeah, so for like maybe like 10 shows, I'm just standing in front of Brian watching the little red lights while he's doing his just magical sound wizardry
Yeah.
from his hands.
Yeah.
But I swear to those little fucking lights, you get just mesmerized, like
Uh
when you're
huh.
a little kid watching like a newer cassette deck. And it reminded me of, do you remember when like cassette decks all of a sudden they had the heavy, slow eject doors?
Yes. Yes.
I thought that was the best thing in the world. And I would just go to the like JCPenney and like hit the slow eject. But it was the
That's
same
great.
thing with those lights. I loved those lights and hearing Brian play Magical Diagnostic songs at the same time.
Yeah.
So my grandmother lived not far from the Discord house magically. So I had this cool reason to go to DC before I could even drive. I could like take Amtrak down there and like spend time with grandma, but I would just
Yeah.
go and hang out with the punks and pester
Yeah.
Ian. And I was at the Diagnostic house and I was good friends with Roger and Colin, especially Brian. I always felt kind of like the little pest, like how do you do this? How do you do that?
I still feel like that with Brian.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And we were chatting for a bit, and his rig was there, and I was like, "What the fuck is this thing?" He's like, "Oh, you want to buy that?" And I was like, "This magical chorus with the lights?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Did you use it on Can I Say?" And he's like, "Oh yeah." I probably didn't, but he knew he could sell it if he said it. And so I was like, "Fuck yeah!" And I remember it was $125, and I was like, I've told the story on 10 different podcasts, but I seriously had like this greedy feeling, like I felt like Bilbo sneaking out of like Gollum's cave with the ring, like
Uh huh.
I have the magical
You had
fucking,
it.
I have it, and I like drove up to Rhode Island fast, and then how my guitar sound happened was I got back to Newport, went to our practice space, and my buddy Tom Gorman, who was in Verbal Assault sometimes, and he went on to be in that band Belly.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Um, yeah, but
Sure.
he was in Verbal Assault, like really early on, and then later. But he had just gotten Mesa Boogie Mark III.
Okay.
There's a new guitar store in town that started carrying them, and we're like, what the fuck are these? Because we didn't. No one in punk played those. Never seen one. Didn't know that Metallica used them. But then in the store we'd play them, and we were like, Jesus fucking Christ, this sounds incredible. And he bought one. They're really expensive at the time. And so I got back from my trip. Tom was in the space. I was in the space. Set up my Marshall, plugged in the chorus, and immediately we were both like, fuck, that sounds good.
Yeah.
And then it occurred to me that it had two outputs. I had never had a chorus in my life up to that point. And I was like, dude, there's a second output. Put it in your boogie. And he did turn on the boogie, and I started playing Running, which is one of to me, that's my fucking opus,
Yeah.
best song I've ever written. I started playing that, and it's, through a really nice old Marshall and a brand new boogie in stereo, and both of us are in between them. And we both had like my face, it was like Christmas. And
Uh-huh.
I looked at Tom, and Tom had the same face for a second, but then Schmiegel, like, he realized that it was my sound because I did it first, and then he got like a greedy thing, like, oh, it's his. And then
Fuck.
anyways, much like Schmiegel's Ring, it was so powerful I could never turn it off after that day.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, everyone's like, oh, he's the chorus guy.
The power of the stereo chorus.
That fucking thing. And then, my band after that, I finally like swore it off, and it wasn't as fun. I missed it.
Yeah, but you know what? It was that you were part of that great thing in the 80s where guys discovered the chorus. And I mean, I'm talking, Dr. No on the Quickness record, even Eye Against Eye. Yourself, the 7 Seconds records, like Soul Force Revolution and all things. Brian, for sure.
Yep.
It was that chorus added to hardcore music, and it made it pop and it made it glisten in this really cool way. And it's because I was buying records, that was like my records. We were, my brother and I were, I've told this story 1,000 times. We're from Texas, and we were into thrash metal and crossover and hardcore and punk and everything, anything that was counterculture. And we were buying those records as they were coming out. So it's this comforting sound, this guitar sound to me that I just love so much.
For me, it was the Embrace record.
I left that one out. Absolutely the Embrace.
Just that
record.
opening riff. And then, so that and the Can I Say record, where I was just like, I need some of that.
Yeah. And you hear some of those guys talk about it, and they were like, some of them were influenced by like Peter Buck, like REM and stuff. And that's a weird reference, I always thought.
Yeah, I remember these days so clearly, and there was a lot of closet U2 fans.
Yeah,
that just wanted that ethereal, because it was a very refreshing sound when it started happening. All the whooshy and the delays even too. But U2, it was a dividing thing. It's kind of, if you think about it, it's kind of what broke Minor Threat up, because Brian and Lyle wanted to go U2-y, and Ian was like, fuck that. And and then on so our first big tour was a 7 Seconds tour, and that was right when Kevin was just like, fuck it, I'm wearing a fringy jacket, and I'm gonna write more, like he wanted more U2-y chorusy stuff. For me, the chorus, I kept the chorus, like I still wanted to play spooky, scary, more Black Flaggy, Dr. No, scary stuff, and the chorus still works for that. But
it totally does, and it makes it even creepier in a weird way. You know what I mean?
So creepy.
There's such a cool thing, and I think that was sort of when hardcore music and punk rock music, and let's face it, Discord took that route, the U2, REM, and I'm not saying those bands sounded like that. They did just get influenced by what else was going on, and let's, for lack of a better term, alternative or college music or whatever. And they sort of went and did likewise and did their own thing with it and created this other sound. But I think that's definitely where it went with that. So your guitar choices back then, in the pictures I've seen, there were a lot of Gibsons going on. It looked like there was a Les Paul Studio. Is that what was happening? Or was that just the Paul?
It was that you just named my. So the first, I had a shitty fake Strat thing, for my first year, and then I wanted a Les Paul so bad. It was like I just needed, like I had this one picture of Al Baril doing his
Yeah.
fucking sick jump, and also that Code of Honor record with the
Yeah.
skateboards and the Les Paul on the brick wall. Like those two, I would just stare at those two fucking things, and I just wanted a Les Paul so bad. And so yeah, like all the skate punks in my town just worked at these two like tourist restaurants all summer, and end of the summer, I had just enough to buy the studio, which was, it turns out that was the first year they made the studio.
Oh, no kidding.
And and then um, if we get to the things that got away segment of the podcast, I'm a
Oh,
listener.
you've listened.
Love the
You've listened.
podcast. Oh, I've listened to almost all of them. But
Thank you.
I have a
Thank you.
great story about that Les Paul. But I
Oh, we'll
only,
get there, my friend.
from 10th grade on, I only had that one guitar. All my tours, I only had one guitar.
No shit.
Yeah, and I break strings almost every show. We got really good at just the band would go off onto some Space Jam, and I can change strings so fucking fast, it's crazy. And
Yeah.
I mean, like probably 500 shows with just the one guitar.
Wow.
And even now, I'm just out of habit. I just take the one guitar. Now I'm traveling all the way back to the East Coast every time I'm the West Coast.
Sure. Well,
Uh,
that brings up a question. You guys were from from Rhode Island, correct?
yeah, Newport, Rhode Island.
Newport, not Providence. I mean that's interesting, and that's been a theme with this as well. I'm from this like really small, shitty, terrible town, and
Which one?
Sherman, Texas.
Sherman.
Yeah, terrible. And
Dallasy.
it's about an hour north of Dallas,
Okay.
so it's sort of a suburb of Dallas. But I wonder if you guys had the same thing where, yes, you were on the East Coast, but you weren't in sort of a punk mecca. It's kind of like with the 7 Seconds guys being from Reno, and you were around at the time when you were probably the band that other bands stayed with when they were up your way. Like that there was the big boys in Austin here,
Yep.
and then like 7 Seconds at Reno. Yeah,
Stayed there.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So you guys were probably the one in Newport. I'm guessing.
Yeah, Newport. I mean, being on the West Coast now, like there's Portland, Seattle, but everything's so far. Newport was, it's 40 minutes to Providence, hour and a half to Boston, 3.5 hours to New York.
Right.
So we were in this perfect, and it's literally an island. There's bridges, but it's an island. There's a little bit of a, it's like emotionally getting off the island is it feels further.
Yeah.
But we had it was like this fucking incredible insular little scene just on the island. We probably had like 60 skateboarding, hardcore, just like all in kids.
Wow.
And then nearby, like there's a Barrington crew. This band Idle Rich were sort of one of our kind of big brother bands.
Right.
And then Providence was literally 45 minutes away. So it was like a road trip to get there, but it was a tiny one.
Right. Sure.
And then, the Youth of Today dudes were like my main road trip buddies,
Right.
for all the early years. And, if there's a Bad Brain show anywhere between, New York or Boston, we'd all be
Did
there.
you guys kind of play with Boston bands a whole lot? Like you said,
yeah.
Al Baril, like SSD or, Slapshot or Gangrene or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. It seemed like at least once a month you play with FUs, Jerry's Kids, Gangrene. SSD, they sort of shifted to like I saw them maybe only 3 times because they were, they started only like going to like California and like kind of playing these like bigger shows, but they weren't hammering away every month like, all the other Boston bands were. They were early on, they set up the whole all ages, landscape, but then they weren't as around much. And they were like the biggest, toughest dudes. Like I was able to just, I was a tiny pimply kid at this point, but I was pretty shy, but I would fucking make myself, meet all these people. But SSD were like bigger and scarier. And I like, to this day, even on Facebook, I love Al Baril. Like he's the funniest motherfucker. And but I'm still like a little kid, like too afraid to go up and say, like,
Yeah,
hey,
yeah, yeah.
we're from Rhode
I
Island.
I've had a lot of talks about them with Mike Gitter, who I'm sure you know Mike Gitter as well.
Yeah, no, well,
Yeah, yeah, he's the best. He's the best.
yep,
Hello, Mike Gitter, if you're listening.
yep.
Anyway, okay. Well, so we definitely got your. Well, let's go ahead and get into. Well, actually, before we get into your one that got away, who were your guys? Who were your guys that you wanted to be like? Who were your guitar influences?
It was all DC. It
Okay.
was, I mean, starting with Doctor No, like there's everyone, and then there was him. It was to this day. I've never even tried to learn a Bad Brain song. I don't. It's like this untouchable.
I agree with you.
Can't even understand
I agree with you.
what he's doing,
There,
and don't
there are
even want
those
to like. Don't
there
even
are
tell
those
me.
bands that everyone tries to cover and no one
Oh,
gets right.
don't cover the Bad Brains.
Yeah, you don't cover Bad Brains.
You
You
don't
don't
do it.
cover and my band has covered Black Flag. We've covered Ramones, but there's those bands that and fortunately I've had the luck of my career pretty much satelliting from Bill Stevenson for my entire
Hmm.
life. And Bill has the theory that no band covers Black Flag correctly.
Yeah,
He's so collegiate about Black Flag, but so many of those bands and were like that, and that's what made them so interesting and great and perfect in their own way because they were four guys that played very specifically, and the Bad Brains or the Ramones or whatever were the sum of their parts.
hmm,
And so if you're not phrasing the way Daryl Jennifer played bass or the way Earl Hudson played drums, or you're not gonna sound like that song. Yeah, you
it.
can do "Sailin' On," but you're not gonna. It's not done right, and it's almost a
No.
travesty. You know.
Yeah, I mean they were. Uh, Doctor No was already a pretty accomplished like jazz musician, and
Sure.
you know, unless you're gonna go down that whole road to get back to Bad Brains,
Hmm.
you're not gonna figure it out.
Well,
And
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like it was. I mean, anyone that talks about the Bad Brains from this era, or anyone that's seen him, just knows it was a magical fucking hour.
Yeah.
Where no one could touch it. But I didn't want to play like Doctor No, but I wanted to try to make those just feelings happen. Like
Sure.
I was fucking transported. Like I mean, any of those tempo change, breakdown, buildups. It fucking just I get goosebumps thinking about it.
Oh yeah.
And then so he was the one guy that if I ever wanted to really play leads, I can't even call his things leads because they were just phrases and
They're like
stories, and
soundscapes.
it's not like he's just like attacking a pentatonic scale. It's like
Right.
it's a different thing. And so as a young guitar player wanting to be like Dr. No, I try, but I was like, I just can't do that. So but he was that was my unattainable goal. The DC stuff was more attainable. But it was obviously Brian, but Tom Lyle
Sure.
should be mentioned in every conversation because he was, I think, as a songwriter. I mean, how many just epic, beautiful, scary fucking riffs can you write in one 10-year period? And he just had so many hits per record. It was crazy.
Right.
Mike Hampton, uh, guy's pretty good. I always forget to
Yeah.
mention Scream, but the Still Screaming album was probably top 5 formative records.
Well,
Um,
the captain. It's funny you mentioned him because Brian, he's Brian's guy. And Brian will
mm.
just. It's all Captain
Oh
Sensible. You know what I mean?
yeah, oh yeah, everyone from DC loves the
Everyone.
Damned, and then
Everyone.
I moved there, and I was like, well, I was more of a Clash guy, and I was
Well,
like,
yeah, yeah.
Clash is okay, but it's all about the Damned. I just never, to this day, I'm like, all right, if you say so. There was an epic show that I think the Bad Brains played that they were all at, and it was the show that
That was the
turned them
one.
all. Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Um.
uh,
Well, I was actually gonna say there's a whole bunch of points in there. Back to but to your point about Doctor No, I was in a band in the '90s that toured with them when they got back together,
mm-hmm,
and I picked his brain, Doctor No's brain about who his guys were then, and it was Alan Holdsworth and John McLaughlin and the
Yep,
Mahavishnu Orchestra and Al Di
exactly.
Meola and Return to Forever and all of that shit. And then it made so much sense. It really did.
But look what he did with that.
No
How
shit.
fucking cool
Yeah.
is that?
Yeah.
I don't know if we should even go down. Well, and so in the year I moved to DC for about 6 years, and starting in 1988. And that year I went to college, and I took the first music theory class in my life. I kind of tried to stay away from all that because it
Hmm.
wasn't punk. And so I took a music theory and a jazz improv
Oh,
class.
wow.
And so that was my first real exposure, and just kind of letting myself, like, I never, I listened to the Chris Shiflett
Mm.
podcast last week, and just talking about like Guitar Player magazine and tablature. I would never look at them. I would never get one of
Right.
those. And I, like, opening one to me was like cheating, because I was such a little bratty purist. I was like, no,
Sure.
you can't look at the magic. And it was like a conscious decision to only learn from like looking at people, and I don't have a great ear. I've never been able to just like play along with records. I just, even if I know it's a G chord, it never sounds right, and I just could never do it. So it was just
Right.
like I had to either absorb it at a show or come up with it, just on my own. And then that all changed this one year, the first year in DC, and where all of a sudden I was like, by the end of the year, I knew all the Mixolydian scales and the Phrygian scales and the Dorian
Uh-huh.
scales, and you can sort of hear that on the last, well, the On EP we did. It gets
Yeah.
pretty noodly, and that was my first connection to be like, oh, it was like the first tangible connection to what Dr. No was doing, whereas
Sure.
like little tiny parts of, like, especially the Mixolydian scale, I was
Yeah.
like, oh fuck, this is,
You start
you know
connecting the dots.
oh shit, I think I found something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but it was that, it's sort of that year sort of haunted me, because now that I knew about keys and scales, I had a hard time getting back out, and
Right.
I would just listen to Rise Above, and I'd be like, that is not in a fucking key, and that's, I felt like I lost that path in my life, because now,
Sure.
to get out of a minor and major scale, I it was hard. It was way harder to do. It took years to get back to just being able
Well,
to get out of that template.
speaking of Rise Above and Greg Ginn, what blew my mind about him was hearing The Shape of Jazz to Come, was hearing an Ornette Coleman and realizing that that's what he was doing. Now, while he
Huh.
wasn't just deliberately playing out of key for playing out of key's sake,
Mm-hmm.
he was doing Ornette Coleman, and he very much knew his scales and his key and
Huh.
his theory and all of his stuff. All of
I've never known the backstory there.
all of those SST guys, he's their Jimi Hendrix, every
Mm.
one of them,
Oh
and
God.
yeah, and he was deliberately doing something. And to
Mm-hmm.
know that was such a game changer for me. It was such a mind blower. And like, here's this kid that's referencing this jazz icon that no one's even fucking heard of, and doing it in this way and bringing it it's mind blowing. It's absolutely mind blowing.
God, he does it. He does it. I mean, even back then he was so skilled, and
Yeah,
the notes they didn't make any
any relative sense.
sense to
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
and they sounded fucking. And he did it with so much authority that you're like, it seemed like it was just coming from above and through his
It was like
fingers.
it was like dictation from a celestial being or something. And you're right,
Yep.
such authority, just on stage in those videos where he's just looking at the crowd, staring them down, like, yeah, I'm playing way out of key, and you're fucking taking it. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
so awesome, so awesome.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's only one of those guys. That is for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So since you broached the subject, what is your one that got away?
So that Studio Les Paul. What year is this? So late summer 1989. We're about to go to Europe for the second time, and show up at the practice space. The lock's broken off.
Oh,
Fucking, my guitar's gone. My Marshall's gone. The Brian's stereo chorus rack effect is gone. Bass amp is gone, and for some reason the boogie wasn't gone, probably because no one knew what a boogie was back then, and they just saw the
Right.
Marshall and was like, oh. So magically they didn't take the boogie. But we were leaving in like 8 days. I was just about to. Back then, I literally crated everything up, including my cabinets, and just sent this one big crate over there because the first tour we didn't do that, and I was playing out of like a PV Bandit with like a like all kinds of crazy amps every night.
Mm-hmm.
So all the shit was fucking gone. We had to leave in a week. Just devastated, and that that guitar I literally like worked all summer at this shitty restaurant washing dishes to pay for.
Yeah.
And so I made flyers. I had all the serial numbers. I've always been sort of organized that way. And went up to Providence just to like put them in every music store. And me and the bass player Darren were driving up to Providence, and I missed the exit. And I remember there's this one weird little music store. If you're in Providence and you're vegan, you probably go to Plant City, this really great vegan restaurant. And it was in that parking lot right off the highway. And so we kind of spun around. I didn't even know how to really get there. I just knew it was down there. Went into this music store. The guy at the counter was talking to someone, so we were just kind of waiting with our flyers. And this little fucking Captain Kangaroo looking guy, kind of looked like an Australian Captain Kangaroo, like dock shore worker, kind of scruffy with like tinted glasses, walks in with my fucking guitar case in his hand, Verbal Salt spray painted on it.
While you're there.
Well, I'm there because I missed the exit.
God.
But he has this little like kid, this little like 4-year-old kid. He has my guitar in one hand and this little kid in the other. And he was like not a big dude, but like he looked fucking pretty gnarly and tough.
Yeah.
And I wasn't like I didn't know what to do. I'm not like much of a fucking fist fighter or anything, but I just it was like my body just went right up to him and both hands just grabbed the fucking guitar, and I was like, dude, this is my fucking guitar. What are you doing with it? And he got kind of sheepish. I think if the little kid wasn't there, he probably would have just fucking kicked my ass and ran. But he had this little kid, and I was, I wasn't going to let go of the guitar. And he gave the story about finding it in the bushes behind the Newport Library, and I was like, huh. And then I noticed his T-shirt was LNH, which is the construction company that was working on the building.
Oh.
So I kind of I figured it out right then, and he's like, okay, well, yeah, I'm glad you found your guitar. And turned and really quick and just bolted out. And he had this little kid with him, and I still had, I was like, he knows where the rest of my shit is. So I didn't exactly know what the fuck to do. I was thrilled to have my guitar. So me and Darren like follow him to his guitar, and that little goddamn kid, I couldn't, I was like, the whole time I was like talking to him about my guitar, I knew I was trying not to embarrass him in front of the little kid. I was more concerned about the kid than solving the main problem. Anyways, I got that guitar back. We flew back to Newport. I figured out where the construction company was, told them the story. They gave me his address. I got Doug, who was a little older, our drummer, just for a little backup. And we went to the house, and his like wife or old lady answers the door, and she has two even smaller kids in this little shitty hotel room. And we were like, look, we know your husband, boyfriend, whatever, took our shit. I got the guitar back. We're leaving for Europe. We won't call the cops. We just need our shit back. Please. And she's like, okay. And nothing happened. And
did she have the stuff?
We looked at, it was a one hotel room thing. It wasn't in that room. It was probably in his van. We followed him back to this van. And then 2 days later, we kind of staked the place out, and then they disappeared, and that was that.
So you never got the other stuff back?
I never got the other stuff back, and the thing that got away part is that because we had to leave in like 2 days, I went up to Boston, had to replace the effects. I had the Brian's chorus and a digital delay, and I was using the delay a lot at that point. And I couldn't find those, so I bought a Roland, I think it was like called the GT8. It It was like their
Okay.
first guitar all-in-one effects processor.
Right.
So I bought that, and I bought like a brand new JCM 800. I'd kill for an 800 now, like a good one. But those two things never sounded quite right.
Kind of the
The
same.
the effects, they were kind of early generation digital, and they just sounded kind of chintzy to my ear. But
Right.
by that point I had bought them, so I was stuck with them. In those days, you
But
had to
that
make, if you got it, you were gonna live with it if you could. So the
Pete,
guitar never sounded quite as good after that moment to
that's
me.
still a crazy story, though. You just happened to go into this store that you weren't going to in the first place.
Yeah.
You didn't even know where it was, and then the dude
Yep.
walks in with your guitar. That's
Yeah.
insane. Universe talking crazy shit.
And
That's
then
nuts.
what's even weirder is that when I moved to DC, we had toured Europe a couple times, and a lot of band friends would come and visit. And this Polish band, my dad was born in Poland. I still have a lot of family there. Um, I just have a soft spot. And there was this one Polish band, Ahimsa, and they made the trek to DC, which I knew was like pretty huge trip for
Yeah.
them, a lot of money. And they wanted to visit me, and then they wanted to get a Les Paul. And so I was like, took them all around DC and Maryland and Virginia. And, about 2 hours in, I was like, so how much money do you have for Les Paul? And they kind of had this like proud look on their face, and they're like, we have $500. And I was like, ooh, this is like 1991 or two.
Yeah.
And I was, I took them around, and everything was 1,500 and then they were kind of depressed, and we got back to my place, and I, we were, when we Verbal Assault stopped, we were pretty resolute, like we weren't going to be one of those bands that, showed back up to make a bunch of money and,
Right.
do like a reunion tour just for kicks, and at least not for 3 decades. And anyways, before they left, I was like, well, I basically just gave him the guitar to.
Oh, that's so cool.
So when Verbal Assault was like, getting back together, I tracked him back down. He still has it, and I was like, look, if Verbal Assault really does this show, I might need that thing. It's the only guitar I ever used on everything we recorded. And he was down, but he didn't want to sell it. He's like, no fucking way I'm selling it. And
Yeah.
he's had it for 30 years. I've only had it for like 8. So we chatted back and forth, but then I had bought the Paul, the guitar you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so basically I just slapped an EMG in that, and it sounded exactly the same. And then I learned that the Paul was just like a 2-year run up to the idea of the studio. It was just going to be the stripped down, less
Version.
expensive Les Paul. And since then I found my original studio on Reverb just a couple months ago, and got
cool.
it. Yes, exact same. It was built 5 weeks before the other one.
Wow.
Same factory.
So that's what you used. You used at the reunion shows.
No, I didn't have time to get an EMG in it, so I haven't used it. And I got another the Paul and put an EMG in that and leave that in Rhode Island.
The Paul, and then there was the SG, which I think Ian Mackay had the SG. Those were great. Those were great guitars. So you're an EMG guy. So you're a active pickup guy.
Well, kind of. Here's the studio.
Oh yeah.
Same one.
Wow.
Kind of like all my gear. I got lucky with my first real Marshall. Just a perfect head. Didn't need a distortion pedal. I didn't really play with pedals at all, just because the stage was. There's so many people on the stage all the time. It would always get turned off. So I committed to that. I got the boogie, and then it was really like once you got it, you had to work with what you got. And then when I got the boogie, the guitar didn't have enough oomph anymore for that amp, and that same guitar store just started selling EMG pickups, and he's like, yeah, they have more gain. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, it's more distorted. And I was like, okay. And plopped that in, and that, that was the last ingredient of that.
It's funny you say that about pedals, because when I interview punk rock guitar players and hardcore guitar players, we all, because we come from that, we come from playing improvised sort of spaces, people's houses and in basements and VFW halls. We made it work without pedals. And then you talk to a guy that maybe was a country musician or even a metal musician or whatever, and they always use pedals. It's like, no, you don't understand. Like we toured in vans and cars and things like that. Like we wanted the least amount of shit to carry in.
Yeah.
We wanted the head to provide our distortion. We didn't have a fucking lead boost. It was,
just a little volume knob change, and that's all.
Totally. Pickup change, whatever you got. Boom, boom. Well, Pete, I think that about does it. Well, so what have you been up to since Verbal Assault? Have you any other music endeavors since then?
I was, after Verbal Assault, I was still living in DC. I had a band called Rain Like the Sound of Trains. That was less popular than Verbal Assault, but we toured just as much and worked our asses off. And by the end of that band, I was tired. I'd had over a decade of doing like 80s fan touring, and my tinnitus was out of control. I was just tired and kind of wanted to do something more at that point, felt real. I wanted some. So I moved to Olympia, finished school studying organic farming, which I quickly learned I shouldn't do that. I would have been just a stressed out mess. But that led right me back to carpentry, which in DC, I sort of became the handyman. Okay. I kind of fixed up the Discord house a bunch and kind of blame Ian for both of my careers. And then when I moved to Olympia, as soon as I graduated, my organic farming teacher had me build him a small cabin for his farm. And then I just got right into kind of green, energy efficient building.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. Bicycle Home Building is the name of my company. My daughter made a pretty awesome website for me. And she put a pretty funny bio that she pranked me, but I'm just leaving it. But yeah, we build super energy efficient houses. Like my house doesn't use it makes more electricity than we use, kind of thing.
That's amazing. And it still scratches that creative itch and everything.
It's the same as me. I hang out with the same 4 dudes every day. Each house takes about a year, which is like the same as like the old touring album cycle. Like it feels so much like being in a hardcore band. It's weird.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, congrats. So, and speaking of hardcore bands, does Verbal Assault have anything? I know you played last year, but do you have anything coming up this year?
Yeah. We're just taking a breather and kind of resetting it. Old friend Ron Martinez, Crawl Space Booking, is booking us now.
I know Ron.
I
know Ron very well.
So we got to get back on the ball and book some stuff. We might head to Europe again.
Well, if anyone is listening, go check out Verbal Assault. You do have a website. Isn't it verbalassault.com? Am I wrong?
Yeah. Okay. I think Chris has dusted it off. It was pretty, 1990s, but I think Chris has sharpened the pencil and gotten it up to date.
Oh, cool. Well, I would look forward to seeing you as well if you come through Austin, Texas, or if I might see you on the road. I'm perpetually out there. So, yeah.
Yeah, you are. And good job, man.
Thank you.
Proud of you. I'm really proud of you guys.
Thank you so much.
The first time I heard Rise Against, your fucking singer is so goddamn good. He's such a good storyteller. I was like, I've just been drawn in and appreciate you guys.
Even though I'm in a band with him, I still am very much a fan of him. So I talk about him as if he isn't one of my closest friends and a band member. But man, what a talent! What a talent!
Yep.
If I do say so myself.
It's the good storytellers that always hold up the longest.
Absolutely, I very much agree with you there. I very much agree, and he's influenced by the right guys. From Neil Young to Ian to he's got the right influences. So, Well, Pete, again, thank you so much
Yeah, thank you, Zach.
for doing this. And anybody listening, check out Verbal Assault, everything you've ever done, and go see them live. We'll talk to you soon, man.
Right on.